Let's talk about one of the most ambitious filmmaking experiments ever pulled off, Boyhood. This movie wasn't just set across 12 years. It was literally filmed across 12 real years, from 2002 to 2013. Director Richard Linklater didn't recast actors or use makeup to age the characters. Instead, he reunited the same cast each year and filmed a few scenes. That's it, year by year, letting time naturally do what it does. The boy in the title, Eller Coltrane, was just 6 years old when filming began. By the time the movie ended, he was 18 and heading to college. No time jumps, no flashbacks, no sudden transitions, just a slow, seamless unfolding of life. It captures the awkwardness of puberty, the quiet moments in family life, and the little changes that shape who we are. And it's not just about the boy. His parents, played by Patricia and Ethan Hawke, also evolve. You see them go through divorces, new relationships, career changes, and all the emotional messiness that comes with adulthood. The power of Boyhood isn't in its plot. It's in its honesty. There are no big, dramatic twists. It's life in motion, caught on film. It's about growing up, but also about parenting, mistakes, and time slipping by before you realize it. And it worked. The film earned 6 Oscar nominations and a Best Supporting Actress win for Patricia. But more than that, it became a time capsule, a raw, quiet, emotional look at what growing up really feels like. Filming for 12 years isn't just a gimmick. In Boyhood, it's the entire soul of the movie. This is not merely a lengthy shoot. It ranks among the most cursed productions in cinematic history. Orson Welles, the legendary director behind Citizen Kane, began working on The Other Side of the Wind in 1970. He had a bold idea, a mockumentary-style film about a legendary filmmaker, played by John Huston, trying to make his comeback with an experimental movie while dealing with critics, hangers-on, and his own crumbling legacy. Yeah, Welles was basically making a film about himself. The movie was part satire, part art house, and part chaotic party. Shot in shifting styles and full of jump cuts, fake documentaries, and a movie within a movie. It was ambitious, weird, and ahead of its time. But here's the kicker. Welles shot the film over 6 years, from 1970 to 1976, and never finished it. Why? The production was plagued by constant money problems, international legal disputes, and Welles's own perfectionism. At one point, reels of the film were literally locked in a vault in Paris, controlled by the brother-in-law of the Shah of Iran. No, seriously. After Welles died in 1985, The Other Side of the Wind became known as the holy grail of unfinished films. Film geeks, critics, and even Spielberg wanted to see it completed, but it stayed in limbo for decades. Then, in 2018, 42 years after filming wrapped, Netflix finally stepped in. A team of editors, including people who had worked with Welles, reconstructed the movie based on his notes, rough cuts, and recordings. And finally, it was released to the world. Watching The Other Side of the Wind today is like opening a cinematic time capsule. It's messy, experimental, and not for everyone, but it's pure Orson Welles, wild, unpredictable, and way ahead of his time. And the fact that it took longer to finish than some people's entire careers, that just makes it legendary. This was Stanley Kubrick's final film, and he made sure it was as intense and mysterious as anything he'd ever done. But the real story? The behind-the-scenes chaos was just as wild as the movie itself. Eyes Wide Shut is about a New York doctor played by Tom Cruise who spirals into a surreal world of temptation, jealousy, and secret societies after his wife, played by Nicole Kidman, confesses to having once fantasized about another man. It's haunting, erotic, psychological, and it's dripping with that signature Kubrick unease. Now, here's the jaw-dropper. This movie holds the Guinness World Record for the longest constant film shoot in history, 400 straight days. That's over a year of continuous filming. No breaks. No normal schedules. Just Kubrick, Cruise, Kidman, and a lot of perfectionism. Kubrick was notorious for shooting dozens, sometimes hundreds of takes for a single scene, and Eyes Wide Shut was no exception. Rumors say he made Tom Cruise walk through a doorway over 90 times. He'd rewrite dialogue at the last second, change blocking, and tweak lighting obsessively. The actors were often left emotionally drained and confused about their characters' motives, exactly how Kubrick wanted it. To make things more complicated, Kubrick demanded absolute secrecy. The cast and crew weren't even allowed to talk about the film publicly while it was being made. He even had Cruise and Kidman live in England during filming so he could keep them close. Their real-life marriage was woven into the narrative, adding layers of psychological realism and emotional tension. Tragically, Kubrick died just days after delivering the final cut to Warner Brothers in March 1999, never seeing the film's theatrical release. Some fans even debate whether what we saw was his true final vision, but it remains a powerful, puzzling swan song. Eyes Wide Shut isn't a movie for everyone. It's slow, dreamlike, and filled with ambiguity. But when you realize it was created through a grueling 400-day odyssey, you begin to understand why it feels so hypnotic, raw, and emotionally unsettling. It was more than just a movie. It was a complete psychological test on the characters, the performers, and perhaps even the viewers. This film is one of the most tragic tales in animation history. British animator Richard Williams, best known for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, started working on The Thief and the Cobbler in 1964 as a personal passion project. It was meant to be a masterpiece of hand-drawn animation filled with insanely detailed, fluid, and complex sequences, all without any dialogue from the two main characters. But perfection takes time, and Williams kept tweaking and adding to it for nearly 30 years. He worked without a major studio for decades until Warner Brothers and other investors finally stepped in. Unfortunately, because of constant delays, budget overruns, and missed deadlines, the film was taken away from him in the early 90s, just before completion. A heavily re-edited, watered-down version called Arabian Night was released in 1995. It had added songs, voiceovers, and all the magic stripped out. Still, animation fans have kept Williams' original vision alive through a fan restoration called the Recobbled Cut, a version that shows what could have been. An ambitious, handcrafted, animated epic decades ahead of its time. It's a film where the journey was both the masterpiece and the heartbreak. After Avatar became the highest-grossing movie of all time in 2009, fans expected a quick sequel. But James Cameron had other plans and a lot of patience. The Way of Water took 13 years to release, mainly because Cameron wanted to push the limits of technology again. Again? Yes, he had the script for Avatar in the 80s, but he wanted the technology to catch up to his ideas. Same way, he waited until underwater motion capture was possible, a thing that had never been done at this scale before. The cast, including Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, and Kate Winslet, trained in freediving and filmed many scenes submerged for real. Production began around 2017, and the sequel was filmed back-to-back with other upcoming entries in the Avatar franchise, which added even more delays. On top of that, the visual effects were insanely complex, taking years to finalize. The result? A visually stunning, immersive return to Pandora, with underwater ecosystems, new tribes, and family dynamics at the core. It's less about plot, more about world building, and it shows why sometimes you just can't rush a James Cameron movie. Imagine shooting an entire movie in one single take. No cuts, no edits, no second chances. That's exactly what director Alexander Sokurov did with Russian Ark. The film is a 96-minute continuous shot, filmed entirely inside the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, one of the largest and oldest museums in the world. It's not a gimmick. It's the whole point of the movie. Russian Ark is less of a traditional story, and more like a cinematic time machine. The camera becomes the point of view of a ghostly narrator, silently gliding through the museum's halls and drifting through 300 years of Russian history. You move from one era to another in real time, witnessing royal banquets, war evacuations, imperial balls, and even philosophical conversations between figures from different centuries. Technically, it's mind-blowing. The shoot involved over 2,000 actors, 3 orchestras, period costumes, and a camera crew moving through 33 elaborate rooms, all in a single uninterrupted take. And here's the catch. They had only one day to pull it off. Why? Because they needed natural lighting from the museum's windows, and the Hermitage was only available for a few hours that day. They had 4 tries. The first 3 attempts failed due to technical glitches or missed cues. On the 4th and final take, everything clicked. No resets, no patching it up in post-production. Just one perfect, continuous ballet of movement, light, sound, and history. What makes Russian Ark special isn't just the technical feat. It's how the fluid motion of the camera mirrors the flow of time. It's not just a film, it's like wandering through a dream, where past and present coexist in the same space. It's an art film, for sure. Slow, poetic, sometimes surreal, but it's also a landmark in filmmaking. A visual symphony performed once and captured forever. This is often called the greatest movie never made. After finishing 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick became obsessed with making a massive biographical epic about Napoleon Bonaparte. And when I say obsessed, I mean full-on, all-consuming 24/7 obsession. Starting in 1967, Kubrick dove headfirst into research. He read hundreds of books, personally wrote a 147-page script, and created a detailed card catalog of over 17,000 historical facts, including Napoleon's daily routine, weather patterns, and even the phases of the moon for battle accuracy. He kept a massive index of Napoleon's entire life. down to the hour. He planned to shoot on location in France and Romania with 40,000 real soldiers. Yes, real people, not CGI extras. He also wanted to film in natural light using special lenses later used in Barry Lyndon. He cast David Hemmings as Napoleon and Audrey Hepburn as Josephine, though she declined, and had everything lined up for a 1971 release. So what happened? Studios got scared. Big-budget historical epics like Waterloo and War and Peace flopped at the box office around the same time, and MGM and United Artists pulled the plug. Just like that, Kubrick's dream collapsed. But he never gave up. He tried for years to revive the project, even folding some of its ideas into Barry Lyndon. You can actually see Napoleon's DNA in that film, especially the visual style and attention to 18th century detail. Though Napoleon was never made, Kubrick's research was so extensive that it's now used as a historical resource by scholars. In 2011, Taschen released a giant book collecting his notes, photos, and script. And here's the twist. The story isn't over. In recent years, Steven Spielberg, a huge Kubrick fan, is working with HBO to turn Kubrick's Napoleon into a limited TV series, using all the original materials he left behind. So while Kubrick's Napoleon never reached the screen during his lifetime, his vision might finally be resurrected, not as a film, but as a legendary cinematic ghost returning in episodic form. Sometimes a great film doesn't just get forgotten, it nearly vanishes completely. Wake in Fright is a haunting psychological thriller from Australia, released in 1971. Directed by Ted Kotcheff, who later directed First Blood, the first Rambo film, it tells the story of a school teacher stranded in a brutal, alcohol-soaked outback town where civilization slowly unravels. What starts as an innocent stopover turns into a descent into madness, masculinity, and existential despair. Critics at the time loved it. It premiered at Cannes, earned praise from Roger Ebert, and even got a standing ovation. But in Australia, it flopped. The marketing was poor, and audiences weren't ready to see their own culture reflected back in such a harsh, unflinching way. Over the years, the film just disappeared. And here's where the real story begins. By the early 2000s, Wake in Fright was considered a lost film. The original negatives were missing, and only low-quality VHS copies survived. Film historians searched everywhere, thinking it was gone forever. Then, in 2004, a miracle happened. A dusty old box labeled for destruction was found in a Pittsburgh storage unit. Inside, the original film negatives of Wake in Fright. They had been sitting there for decades unnoticed. What followed was a painstaking 5-year restoration project led by editor Anthony Buckley. Frame by frame, the movie was rebuilt digitally, color-corrected, and brought back to life. In 2009, it was re-premiered at Cannes, 38 years after its original debut. Critics hailed it as one of the greatest Australian films ever made. Quentin Tarantino called it the most terrifying movie he'd ever seen. Martin Scorsese championed its restoration. And for good reason. Wake in Fright isn't just a thriller, it's a psychological gut punch. It explores the thin line between civilization and savagery, all set under the scorching sun of the outback. It's sweaty, raw, and deeply uncomfortable, yet totally unforgettable. The fact that it nearly vanished forever, only to be saved at the last minute, makes its comeback even more powerful. It's not just a great movie, it's a resurrected one. When Jan Martel's novel Life of Pi was published in 2001, people loved it. But Hollywood had one big question. How do you even film this? The story is beautifully strange. A teenage boy named Pi survives a shipwreck and ends up stranded on a lifeboat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with a Bengal tiger named Richard Parker for 227 days. It's philosophical, spiritual, surreal, and a huge technical challenge. For years, it was labeled unfilmable. But that didn't stop people from trying. By 2003, multiple directors were attached, including Night Shyamalan, Alfonso Cuarón, and Jean-Pierre Jeunet, but they all dropped out for one reason or another. Either the tone wasn't right, or the technology wasn't there. That's when Ang Lee, fresh off his Oscar win for Brokeback Mountain, stepped in around 2008 and said, "Let's make this happen." And what followed was a production journey that took nearly a decade. Ang Lee knew the only way to tell the story properly was to push the boundaries of visual effects, especially for the tiger, the ocean, and the surreal sequences involving glowing jellyfish, giant whales, and floating islands. But he also wanted the film to be emotional and deeply human, not just a CGI spectacle. He cast Suraj Sharma, a completely unknown teenager from Delhi, as Pi. Sharma had never acted before, but Lee saw something raw and real in him. Most of the film was shot in a giant water tank in Taiwan, one of the largest ever built for a movie. There were no real ocean scenes. Everything was artificially created with lights, wind machines, and later, cutting-edge CGI. And that tiger? it looks unbelievably real, but 95% of the time, it's fully digital. Visual effects studio Rhythm, Hughes created an almost photorealistic animal with stunning detail and behavior. It was a visual miracle for its time. The movie was finally released in 2012, nearly a decade after the adaptation was first considered. The gamble paid off. It earned over $600 million worldwide, won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Director for Ang Lee, and was hailed as one of the most beautiful films of the decade. However, Life of Pi is not solely focused on its visuals. It's a spiritual survival story, a meditation on faith, storytelling, and the human will to endure. And the ending? It leaves you questioning everything. Was the tiger real? Or was it just a coping mechanism for a much darker truth? Either way, Life of Pi proves that sometimes a story worth telling is worth waiting for, even if it takes nearly 10 years, endless rewrites, and the invention of new filmmaking techniques to get there. When Francis Ford Coppola set out to make Apocalypse Now, he didn't just want to tell a story about the Vietnam War. He wanted the audience to feel the madness of it. And in doing so, he plunged the entire production into a real-life jungle nightmare that almost destroyed his career, his cast, and his sanity. The movie is based on Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness, but it's set in Vietnam, following a soldier named Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, as he journeys upriver to assassinate a rogue colonel named Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando, who's gone completely off the rails and set himself up as a jungle god. Sounds intense? It was, but the real drama wasn't in the story. It was behind the scenes. Filming began in 1976 in the Philippines, and it was supposed to last 6 weeks. Instead, it stretched over 16 months. Everything that could go wrong ultimately did. First, the production was slammed by a typhoon that destroyed sets and halted filming for weeks. Then, Martin Sheen suffered a heart attack mid-shoot and nearly died in the jungle. Coppola had to finish some scenes using Sheen's brother as a double. But the wildest part? Marlon Brando. Brando showed up overweight, unprepared, and hadn't read the script. He was supposed to play a lean, battle-hardened military man. Instead, he looked nothing like the character. Coppola had to rewrite the ending, hide Brando in shadows, and improvise scenes with long philosophical monologues just to make it work. Meanwhile, Coppola himself was losing control financially, mentally, and emotionally. He poured his own money into the film, remortgaged his house, and was constantly rewriting the script on set. At one point, he famously said, "We had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little, we went insane." All of this was captured in the documentary Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse which shows just how close the production came to total collapse. But somehow Coppola pulled it off. The film premiered in 1979 at Cannes and received a 15-minute standing ovation. It went on to win 2 Oscars and is now considered one of the greatest films ever made. It's hypnotic, surreal, terrifying, and it doesn't just depict war, it becomes war. The chaos, the beauty, the dread, it's all there, because the people making the movie actually lived it. Most movies have some level of risk, but Roar took it to a whole new level. This wasn't just dangerous, it was downright insane. The idea came from Noel Marshall, a Hollywood producer who, along with his wife Tippi Hedren, yes, the actress from Hitchcock's The Birds, wanted to make a movie about big cats and human harmony. They had visited Africa in the early 70s and were fascinated by lions. So they thought, why not make a movie with real lions? And not trained ones, our own pet lions. So they started collecting them. And not just lions, tigers, leopards, jaguars, and cheetahs too. Over 150 wild animals were used in the film, and they weren't locked up. They roamed freely through the house and set. The idea was to show that humans and animals could live together peacefully. Spoiler alert, they couldn't. The production, which started in the mid-1970s, took nearly 11 years to complete. And during that time, things got brutal. Over 70 cast and crew members were injured, some seriously. Cinematographer Jan de Bon, who later directed Speed, had his scalp ripped open and needed 220 stitches. Tippi Hedren was bitten on the head and broke her leg falling off an elephant. Her daughter, a young Melanie Griffith, was mauled so badly she needed reconstructive surgery on her face. There was no CGI, no green screens. Every time a lion chases someone in the movie, it's really happening. You're watching actual attacks. Insurance companies refused to cover the film. The budget spiraled from around $2 million to over $17 million, mostly funded by Marshall and Hedren themselves. They lost almost everything. When Roar was finally released in 1981, it flopped hard. The public didn't know what to make of it. Was it a drama? A documentary? A fever dream? Critics called it reckless, but unforgettable. Years later, the film became a cult classic, not for its plot, but because of the sheer jaw-dropping danger of it all. Watching Roar is like witnessing a real-life survival challenge disguised as a family movie. It's not just a film, it's the most insane home video ever made, where the behind-the-scenes story is far scarier than anything on screen. This wasn't just another Martin Scorsese gangster movie. The Irishman was a massive, decade-long filmmaking saga that spanned nearly 10 years from development to release. It's a story about aging, legacy, betrayal, and, ironically, the film itself aged significantly during production. It all started around 2010, when Scorsese and Robert De Niro wanted to collaborate again after years apart. They found their inspiration in the book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt, a detailed account of Frank Sheeran, a mob hitman who claimed he killed Jimmy Hoffa, the infamous union leader who mysteriously vanished in 1975. The story had everything: the mob, the Teamsters, politics, and one man's inner torment across decades. Scorsese was immediately hooked, but he knew that to tell this story right, he needed not just De Niro, but also Al Pacino, Joe Pesci, and a way to make them look decades younger without replacing them with younger actors. That's where the real challenge began. What followed was a long pre-production period, mostly trying to secure funding. Most studios balked at the $175 million budget, especially because a large chunk would be spent on de-aging visual effects. Scorsese wasn't willing to compromise. He wanted his original cast to play themselves at ages ranging from their 30s to their 80s. Enter Netflix. Around 2017, they stepped in with the money and freedom Scorsese needed, trusting his vision. By this point, Joe Pesci had been retired from acting for years and had already turned down the role multiple times. Scorsese reportedly had to convince him over 40 times before he said yes. Filming finally began in 2017 and lasted well into 2018. But post-production was even more intense. The VFX team had to digitally de-age the actors frame by frame without using the traditional motion capture markers, because Scorsese didn't want them interfering with performances. That's why The Irishman wasn't released until late 2019, nearly a decade after it was first conceived. The result was a 3.5-hour epic. Not about glory or violence like Goodfellas, but about regret, loneliness, and mortality. It premiered at the New York Film Festival to rave reviews, and despite some mixed responses to its length and VFX, it was hailed as a late-career masterpiece. The film earned 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, and nods for De Niro, Pacino, and Pesci, though it won none. But The Irishman wasn't about awards. It was a slow, meditative farewell letter from Scorsese to the gangster genre, a genre he helped define. The years it took to make only deepened its message. Time catches up to everyone, even legends.